On the last Saturday of August in 1974, at the Madison County Fair in northeastern Nebraska, a 17-year-old boy named Tommy Westcott walked up to the microphone at the youth talent competition and made an announcement that would change his life.
My name is T.T. Tommy Westcott, he said, his face reddening as the words caught in his throat, and I want to be an auctioneer.
The crowd went quiet for a moment. Then someone in the back laughed. Then someone else. Within seconds, the entire tent was filled with laughter. Not mean-spirited exactly, more like the laughter of people who couldn't believe what they'd just heard. An auctioneer. A boy who couldn't say his own name without stuttering wanted to become an auctioneer. The one profession in the world that requires speaking faster and more fluently than any other. Tommy stood at that microphone, face burning, waiting for the laughter to stop. It took a long time, but one voice cut through the noise. A loud, booming voice from the front row. A stuttering auctioneer. Gerald Hutchins was a big man. 6'3", 240 pounds, with a voice that could carry across a cornfield. He was also the richest farmer in Madison County, with over 2,000 acres and equipment worth more than most people's entire farms. When Gerald Hutchins spoke, people listened. "Son," Gerald continued, still chuckling, "that's the funniest damn thing I've heard all year. You might as well say you want to be a singing telegram." More laughter. Gerald's friends, and Gerald had a lot of friends, the kind that money buys, joined in enthusiastically. Tommy's mother, sitting in the third row, looked like she wanted to disappear. His father, a quiet man who farmed 160 acres on the edge of the county, stared straight ahead, jaw tight, saying nothing. Tommy gripped the microphone stand. His knuckles were white. Every instinct told him to run, to get off that stage, to never speak of this moment again. Instead, he leaned into the microphone and said, "I'm going to be the best auctioneer in Nebraska, and someday, Mr. Hutchins, I'm going to sell something of yours." He walked off the stage to scattered applause, mostly from people who felt sorry for him, and the talent competition moved on to a girl who could yodel. But Tommy Westcott never forgot that moment, and neither did Gerald Hutchins. Now let me tell you about Tommy, because this story only makes sense if you understand what he was fighting against. Thomas James Westcott was born in 1957 in Norfolk, Nebraska, the only child of Earl and Dorothy Westcott. Earl farmed 160 acres of decent land, not great, not terrible, and supplemented his income by working part-time at the grain elevator in town. Dorothy worked as a secretary at the county courthouse. They were solid people, hard-working, honest, poor in money but rich in the things that mattered. Tommy started stuttering when he was 4 years old. Nobody knew why. The doctors said it sometimes just happened, that many children grew out of it. Tommy didn't grow out of it. If anything, it got worse as he got older, especially in stressful situations. School was torture. Every time the teacher called on him, every time he had to read aloud, every time he tried to talk to other kids, the words would jam up in his throat like a traffic accident. The other children learned quickly that Tommy Westcott was an easy target. They would ask him questions just to watch him struggle. They would imitate his stutter behind his back, and sometimes to his face. They would finish his sentences for him, or walk away while he was still trying to get the words out. Tommy learned to be quiet. He learned to nod instead of speak, to point instead of ask, to keep his thoughts inside his head where nobody could mock them. But there was one place where Tommy Westcott came alive, the auction yard. His father took him to livestock auctions starting when he was 6 years old. Tommy would sit in the wooden bleachers, surrounded by farmers and buyers, and watch the auctioneers work. The rhythm of their chant, the speed of their words, the way they could control a crowd with nothing but their voice, it was magic to him. He didn't understand why at first. Here was a profession built entirely on speaking, and he could barely get through a sentence. Why would he be drawn to that? But then he noticed something. The auctioneers didn't speak the way normal people spoke. They had a rhythm, a pattern, a musical quality to their words. It wasn't conversation, it was performance. It was almost like singing. And Tommy discovered, alone in his room, practicing in front of a mirror, that when he fell into that rhythm, when he stopped trying to talk and started trying to chant, the stutter disappeared. Not completely, not always, but enough. 555, now 10. $10 bid, now 15. 15, gimme 15. $15 bid, now 20. The words would flow out of him like water. No jamming, no blocking, no humiliation. It was a miracle, his miracle, and he held on to it like a life raft. Let me stop here and ask you something. Have you ever discovered something that made you feel for the first time in your life like you might be good at something? Like maybe all the things that made you different, all the things that people mocked you for, might actually be leading you somewhere? That's what auctioneering was for Tommy Westcott. A door opening in a wall he thought was solid, but walking through that door would be harder than he ever imagined. After the disaster at the county fair, Tommy went home and didn't talk to anyone for 3 days. His mother worried. His father gave him space. On the 4th day, Earl Westcott knocked on his son's bedroom door. "Can I come in?"
Why, yeah.
Earl sat on the edge of the bed. He was a man of few words himself, not because of any impediment, just because he believed most things didn't need saying. "You still want to be an auctioneer?" Tommy looked at his father for a long moment. "Everyone thinks it's stupid." "I didn't ask what everyone thinks. I asked what you want." "Yes, sir. I want to be an auctioneer." Earl nodded slowly. "Then we need to find you a school." "A school?" "Auction school. There's one down in Kansas City. 3 weeks. They teach you everything. Costs about $400. Tommy knew what that meant. $400 was most of a month's income for the Westcott family. $400 was the repair on the tractor they'd been putting off. $400 was Christmas and birthdays and everything extra for the rest of the year. "Dad, we can't afford—" "Let me worry about what we can afford." Earl stood up. "You got laughed at in front of the whole county. Most people, that would break them. You stood there and told Gerald Hutchins you'd sell something of his someday." A rare smile crossed Earl's weathered face. "That took guts, son. More guts than most men have. You think I can really do this?" "I think the only way to find out is to try." 2 weeks later, Tommy Westcott boarded a Greyhound bus to Kansas City, Missouri, to attend the Missouri Auction School. He was 17 years old. He had $400 of his family's money in his pocket, and he was more terrified than he'd ever been in his life. Now let me tell you about auction school, because this is where Tommy learned what he was really made of. The Missouri Auction School was housed in a converted warehouse near the stockyards. It smelled like cattle and sawdust and desperation, the desperation of 30 students, ranging in age from 17 to 55, all trying to learn a craft that most people thought was impossible to teach. The instructor was a man named Virgil Clement. He was 62 years old, had been calling auctions since 1936, and had a voice like a diesel engine wrapped in velvet. He'd seen every kind of student, fast learners, slow learners, naturals, hopeless cases. He'd never seen anyone like Tommy Westcott. On the first day, each student had to stand at the practice podium and demonstrate their current ability. When Tommy's turn came, he walked to the front of the room on legs that felt like water. "Go ahead, son," Virgil said. "Show us what you got." Tommy opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The familiar block, the wall in his throat, the words piling up behind it like cars in a crash. The other students started to murmur. Someone whispered something about a joke. Tommy closed his eyes. He thought about the auction yard back home. He thought about the rhythm he'd practiced in his room for years. He thought about Gerald Hutchins laughing at him. And then he started to chant. 555, now 10. $10 bid, now 15. 15, 15, gimme 15. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't fast, but it was fluid. No stutter, no blocks, just words, flowing one after another. When he stopped, the room was silent. Virgil Clement walked up to the podium and looked at Tommy for a long moment. "How long you been stuttering, son?" "All me life, sir." "But you don't stutter when you chant."
"And no, sir, not usually."
Virgil nodded slowly. I've been teaching auction for 23 years. I've never seen that before. Most people, when they're nervous, they get worse. You found a rhythm that works around it. Is that okay? Okay? Virgil laughed. A deep, genuine laugh. Nothing like the mockery at the county fair. Son, that's not okay. That's remarkable. You figured out something that speech therapists spend years trying to teach. Your brain found a workaround all by itself. He turned to the rest of the class. Pay attention, everybody. This young man is going to teach you something about determination, because I've never seen someone want something this badly. Tommy Westcott was the worst student in the class for the first week. By the second week, he was average. By the third week, when graduation came, he wasn't the best, but he wasn't the worst either. More importantly, he had a certificate. He was, officially, a licensed auctioneer. Now he just had to prove he could do the job. Let me tell you about what Tommy found when he came home to Madison County, because the world hadn't changed while he was gone. Gerald Hutchins had made sure of that. Word had spread about the stuttering boy who went to auction school. Most people thought it was sweet, in a pitiful kind of way, like a three-legged dog trying to run. Nobody expected anything to come of it. But Gerald Hutchins saw an opportunity to prove a point. The first auction Tommy tried to work was a small estate sale, an old widow's household goods, nothing fancy. Tommy had called the auction house in Norfolk, explained his credentials, and asked for a chance. The owner, a man named Pete Dawson, had agreed to let him try. 2 days before the auction, Pete called Tommy with bad news. "I'm sorry, son. I can't use you."
What? Why?
Gerald Hutchins came by the office today, said if I let a stuttering kid embarrass himself at one of my auctions, he'd never do business with me again. And Gerald Hutchins does a lot of business. Tommy felt the familiar shame rising in his chest. He can't do that. He can do whatever he wants. He's got more money than God, and half the county owes him favors. Pete's voice softened. "I'm sorry, Tommy. I really am. But I can't afford to cross him." Tommy hung up the phone and sat in his room for an hour, staring at the wall. Gerald Hutchins wasn't just going to let this go. He was going to make sure Tommy Westcott never worked as an auctioneer in Madison County. He was going to prove that his mockery at the county fair was justified. And there wasn't a damn thing Tommy could do about it. Or was there? Now let me tell you about Frank Oberlin, because without him, this story ends very differently. Frank Oberlin was 71 years old in 1975. He had been an auctioneer for 46 years, started when he was 25, back when auctioneering was done from the back of a wagon with nothing but your voice and a wooden gavel. He had called auctions during the Depression, during the war, during the boom years and the bust years. He had seen everything. He had also had a stroke 3 years earlier that left his right side partially paralyzed. He could still talk, still think, but he couldn't stand at a podium for hours anymore. His career was over, and he was bitter about it. Frank lived alone in a small house on the edge of Norfolk. He spent his days reading auction catalogs, listening to livestock reports on the radio, and remembering when he was the best in the business. Tommy Westcott knocked on his door in October of "Mr. Oberlin, my name is Tommy Westcott. I graduated from auction school in Kansas City, and I was hoping—" "I know who you are." Frank's voice was gruff, but not unkind. "The stuttering kid who wants to be an auctioneer. Gerald Hutchins has been telling everyone about you." Tommy felt his heart sink. "Eugene, come inside. I want to hear you chant." For the next hour, Tommy demonstrated everything he'd learned at auction school. Frank sat in his armchair, eyes closed, listening. Occasionally he'd hold up a hand and say, "Again," or "Slower," or "Where's your breath coming from?" When Tommy finished, Frank was quiet for a long time. "You know why auctioneering is hard?" he finally asked. "B, because it's fast?" "No. Fast is easy once you practice. Auctioneering is hard because it's intimate. You're not just talking, you're reading people. You're watching their eyes, their hands, their body language. You're having a conversation with 50 people at once, and every one of them thinks you're talking directly to them. Frank leaned forward in his chair. Your stutter. It's not the problem you think it is. In fact, it might be an advantage. An advantage? People remember you. In a world full of auctioneers who all sound the same, you're different. And when you don't stutter, when you hit that rhythm and the words flow, people notice. They think that kid worked hard to get here, and they root for you. But Gerald Hutchins is a bully with money. He's been one his whole life. His daddy was one before him. He thinks because he's rich, he gets to decide who succeeds and who fails in this county. Frank's eyes hardened. I've known men like Gerald for 50 years. You know what always happens to them eventually? What? The bill comes due. It always does. The question is whether you'll be ready when it happens. Frank Oberlin took Tommy Westcott on as an apprentice that day. For the next 3 years, Tommy learned everything the old man knew, not just the mechanics of auctioneering, but the art of it, the psychology, the showmanship, the 1,000 small details that separate a good auctioneer from a great one. He learned to read a crowd the way a poker player reads a table. He learned to sense when a bidder was bluffing and when they had more to give. He learned to control the rhythm of an auction, speeding up when excitement was building, slowing down when attention was flagging. And he practiced. Hours every day, alone in Frank's garage, chanting into an old microphone until his voice was raw, building the rhythm that let him speak without stuttering, making it so automatic that he could do it under any pressure, in any situation. The day will come, Frank told him, when everything depends on your voice, when you're exhausted, when you're emotional, when the whole world is watching, and on that day the rhythm has to be so deep in your bones that nothing can shake it loose. Tommy believed him. He had to. Now let me jump ahead to 1978, because that's when things started to change. Tommy Westcott was 21 years old. He had been working as Frank Oberlin's assistant for 3 years, handling paperwork, moving equipment, doing the unglamorous work that keeps an auction business running. He had called a few small auctions himself, always in towns far enough from Madison County that Gerald Hutchins' influence didn't reach. But Frank was getting weaker. His health was failing. And he knew it. I've got one more big auction in me, Frank told Tommy one evening in June, the Henderson estate sale in September. 400 acres, full equipment line, the works. It's going to be my last one. Your last one? I'm tired, Tommy, and this body isn't going to hold out much longer. Frank looked at his apprentice with something like pride. But I'm not worried about the business, because you're going to take over. Me? But Gerald Hutchins is one man. One man with money, yes, but still one man. You've spent 3 years building a reputation in the counties around here. People know your name, they know you're good, and when I announce that you're taking over my business, they'll give you a chance. What if he tries to stop me? Let him try. Frank smiled, a thin, fierce smile. I've got something Gerald Hutchins doesn't have. What's that? A lifetime of favors. 50 years of calling auctions for people, helping people, being fair when I didn't have to be. You'd be amazed how many people in this part of Nebraska owe me. The smile faded. That's the thing about being a decent person, Tommy. It doesn't pay off right away. Sometimes it takes decades, but it pays off eventually. The Henderson auction in September 1978 was Frank Oberlin's masterpiece. Despite his failing health, he called 4 hours of bidding with hardly a break, selling every piece of equipment, every acre of land, for prices that exceeded all expectations. And at the end, standing at the podium one last time, he made an announcement. Most of you know I'm retiring. My health won't let me continue, but I'm not closing my business. I'm passing it on. Starting next month, Oberlin Auction Services will be run by Tommy Westcott. A murmur ran through the crowd. Everyone knew Tommy's story. Everyone knew about the county fair, about Gerald Hutchins, about the stuttering boy who wanted the impossible. Some of you might have doubts, Frank continued. Some of you might have heard things from people who don't want Tommy to succeed. All I ask is that you give him a chance. Watch him work. Judge him by his results, not by his speech impediment. And if he's not good enough, If he doesn't give you the same quality service I've given for 50 years, then you can take your business elsewhere." He paused, looking out at the crowd. "But I think you'll find that Tommy Westcott is the best young auctioneer in Nebraska, and I stake my reputation on it." That was Frank Oberlin's last public appearance. He died 4 months later, in January 1979, with Tommy at his bedside. "Don't let them beat you," were his last words. "And when Gerald Hutchins' bill comes due, and it will, you be ready." Tommy Westcott was ready. Let me tell you about the years between 1979 and 1982, because they were years of war. Gerald Hutchins did everything he could to destroy Tommy's business. He called in favors, he spread rumors, he threatened farmers who were considering using Tommy's services, warning them that they'd never get credit at his bank, never get fair prices at his grain elevator, never be welcome at his co-op. Some people caved. Some people chose safety over principle, and Tommy couldn't blame them. Gerald Hutchins had real power, and real power meant real consequences. But not everyone caved. Frank Oberlin had been right about the favors. Dozens of families across Madison and the surrounding counties owed Frank something: a kindness during a hard year, a fair deal when they needed one, a word of support when everyone else had turned away. And many of those families decided that honoring Frank's memory meant giving Tommy a chance. Tommy worked harder than he'd ever worked in his life. He drove hundreds of miles to call small auctions. He took jobs that paid barely enough to cover gas money, just to build his reputation. He practiced his chant until he could do it in his sleep, and slowly, steadily, he got better. By 1980, Tommy Westcott was the busiest auctioneer in the region. Not because people felt sorry for him, that sympathy had worn off long ago, because he was good, because he could read a crowd better than anyone, because his chant, when he hit his rhythm, was hypnotic, a machine gun flow of words that drove prices higher than anyone expected. The stutter was still there in normal conversation. It would always be there. But behind the microphone, in the rhythm of the auction, Tommy Westcott was transformed. And Gerald Hutchins was watching. Now let me tell you about the farm crisis, because without it, this story has a different ending. By 1981, the agricultural boom of the 70s was over. Interest rates had skyrocketed. Land values were collapsing. Grain prices had fallen through the floor. Farmers who had borrowed heavily during the good years suddenly found themselves underwater, owing more than their land was worth, with no way to make the payments. The foreclosures started slowly, then accelerated. By 1982, they were happening every week. Gerald Hutchins had been one of the biggest borrowers in Madison County. During the boom, he had expanded aggressively, buying land, buying equipment, building grain storage, always financing through his own bank, on terms that seemed favorable at the time. When the bust came, he was exposed. The numbers were staggering. Gerald owed over $2 million to various creditors: the bank in Omaha that held his operating loans, the equipment dealers who had sold him machinery on credit, the land sellers who had financed his acquisitions. His assets at current market values were worth maybe half that. He tried everything to save his empire. He called in his own favors. He pressured the local banks to extend his credit. He threatened, cajoled, and begged. Nothing worked. In March of 1982, the Federal Land Bank filed foreclosure proceedings against Gerald Hutchins. The hearing was brief. The judge ordered all assets liquidated to satisfy outstanding debts. An auction would be held. Someone would have to call it. Now let me tell you about the phone call Tommy Westcott received on a Tuesday afternoon in April of 1982. "Mr. Westcott, this is Richard Carpenter from the Federal Land Bank in Omaha. We're handling the Hutchins foreclosure in Madison County." Tommy's heart stopped for a moment. Yes, sir. We need an auctioneer for the liquidation sale. It's a big one, over 2,000 acres, full equipment line, livestock, the whole operation. We've had 2 other auctioneers turn it down." "Turn it down? Why?" "Mr. Hutchins has been making calls, warning people that working this auction would be bad for their careers. But our research shows you're the most experienced auctioneer in the area, with the best record for maximizing sale prices. And frankly, given your history with Mr. Hutchins, we thought you might be interested." Tommy was quiet for a long moment. 8 years. 8 years since Gerald Hutchins had laughed at him at the county fair. 8 years since he'd promised to sell something of Gerald's someday. "I'm interested," he said. But I want to make sure you understand something." "What's that?" "I'm going to run a fair auction. I'm not going to sandbag Mr. Hutchins. I'm not going to let personal history affect my professionalism. If someone wants to bid on his property, they'll get a fair chance, and the prices will be whatever the market will bear." Richard Carpenter was quiet for a moment. "That's exactly what we hoped you'd say. The auction is scheduled for May 15th. Can you be there?" "I'll be there." Tommy hung up the phone. His hands were shaking, not from fear but from something else, something that felt like destiny arriving exactly on schedule. Frank Oberlin had been right. The bill had come due. Let me tell you about the morning of May 15th. Tommy Westcott woke up at 4 a.m. He showered, shaved, and put on his best suit, the same dark vest and white shirt he wore to every auction. He looked at himself in the mirror for a long moment. "F555 now 10, he whispered to his reflection. $10 bid now 15. 15 gimme 15. The words flowed. The rhythm was there. 8 years of practice, thousands of hours, countless auctions, all of it building to this moment. He drove to the Hutchins property as the sun was rising. The auction wasn't scheduled to start until 10 a.m., but Tommy wanted to walk the grounds, to see everything one more time, to prepare. The Hutchins farm was enormous, over 2,000 acres of prime Nebraska farmland stretching to the horizon in every direction. A massive barn complex, a farmhouse that looked more like a mansion, equipment worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, combines, tractors, trucks, implements, all of it about to be sold to the highest bidder. Tommy was setting up his podium when a truck pulled into the driveway. Gerald Hutchins got out. 8 years had not been kind to Gerald. He was thinner than Tommy remembered, his hair grayer, his posture stooped. The booming voice that had filled the county fair tent was quieter now, rougher. He walked up to where Tommy was working. "So," Gerald said, "the stuttering boy." Mr. Hutchins, you must be enjoying this." Tommy looked at the man who had humiliated him, who had tried to destroy his career, who had used his wealth and power to make Tommy's life as difficult as possible. "No, sir," Tommy said. "I'm not enjoying this. I never wanted to see anyone lose their farm. I just wanted to do my job." "Your job?" Gerald laughed bitterly. "You know what my job used to be? Running the biggest operation in Madison County, employing 30 people, feeding half the state." He gestured at the equipment lined up for sale. "Now my job is watching a stuttering kid sell everything I built." "I'm sorry for what you're going through, Mr. Hutchins. I truly am. Are you?" Gerald stared at him. "Are you sorry? After everything I did to you?" "Yes, sir. Because I know what it's like to have everyone laugh at you, to be told you're worthless, to have people try to destroy you." Tommy met Gerald's eyes. "I wouldn't wish that on anyone, not even you." Gerald Hutchins was quiet for a long moment. Something shifted in his face. Not softening exactly, but something like recognition, like seeing a person instead of a target for the first time. "You're a better man than I am," Gerald said finally. "I wouldn't have been so generous." "I'm not being generous, Mr. Hutchins. I'm being professional. This auction is going to be fair. Every item is going to get the best price the market will bear. That's my job, and I'm going to do it right." Gerald nodded slowly. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back to his truck. By 10 a.m., over 300 people had gathered at the Hutchins farm. Some were buyers looking for bargains. Some were neighbors paying their respects. Some, Tommy knew, were there to watch Gerald Hutchins' his humiliation, the same way Gerald had once watched Tommy's. Tommy stepped up to the podium. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out at the crowd, and there in the front row sat Gerald Hutchins and his wife. Gerald's face was expressionless. His wife was crying. Tommy took a deep breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "welcome to the Hutchins Estate Auction. We have a lot of ground to cover today, so let's get started." And then he began to chant. "Starting bid lot number 1. We've got a 1978 John Deere 4440, showroom condition. Who'll give me 20,000, 20, now 25, 25, gimme 25. The words flowed out of him like water. No stutter, no blocks, just the pure rhythm that Frank Oberlin had helped him build, the rhythm that had transformed a stuttering boy into the best auctioneer in Nebraska. He called that auction for 6 hours. 6 hours of chanting, reading the crowd, driving up prices. 6 hours of watching Gerald Hutchins sit in the front row, watching everything he'd built be sold piece by piece. When it was over, the total exceeded all projections. The creditors would be satisfied. There might even be something left over for Gerald. Not much, but something. Tommy stepped away from the podium, his voice raw, his suit soaked with sweat. People were shaking his hand, congratulating him on a masterful performance. The Federal Land Bank representatives were thrilled. But Tommy was looking at Gerald Hutchins. Gerald had stood up from his chair. He was walking toward Tommy, his wife beside him. The crowd parted to let them through. They stood face to face, the man who had mocked and the man who had been mocked. 8 years between that moment at the county fair and this one. Gerald extended his hand. "That was the finest auction I've ever seen," he said. "You weren't kidding about being professional." Tommy shook his hand. "I'm sorry it had to be your auction, Mr. Hutchins." "I'm not." Gerald's voice was quiet. "I spent years being cruel to you, and you repaid me with dignity. That's—" He stopped, his own voice catching. "That's not something I would have done. It's what Frank Oberlin taught me. He said being decent doesn't pay off right away. Sometimes it takes decades." He was right. Gerald looked at his wife, then back at Tommy. "I'm done in Madison County. We're moving to Arizona. My wife's sister has a place there. But before I go, I want you to know something." "What's that?" "That day at the county fair, when I laughed at you, I've thought about that day more than you know. I thought I was being funny. I thought I was putting a stupid kid in his place." Gerald's voice broke slightly. "I didn't know I was watching the bravest person I'd ever meet." He turned and walked away, his wife beside him. Tommy never saw him again. Let me tell you about what happened after that, because the story doesn't end with one auction. Tommy Westcott went on to become the most successful auctioneer in Nebraska history. He called over 4,000 auctions in his career: farm sales, estate sales, charity events, livestock auctions. He was named Nebraska Auctioneer of the Year 3 times. More importantly, he never forgot where he came from. Every year, Tommy ran free workshops for young people with speech impediments, teaching them the same techniques he'd discovered, the rhythm patterns, the breathing exercises, the mental tricks that could help them speak more fluently. Dozens of those students went on to careers in public speaking, in broadcasting, in auctioneering itself. He established a scholarship fund in Frank Oberlin's name, helping students attend auction school who couldn't otherwise afford it. The fund has sent over 200 young auctioneers into the profession, and every August, Tommy returns to the Madison County Fair, not to compete, but to watch the youth talent show, to see if there's another kid up there, red-faced and stammering, announcing a dream that everyone thinks is impossible. When he finds one, he introduces himself afterward. "My name is Tommy Westcott," he says, still stuttering after all these years, still fighting the same battle he's always fought. Because he knows something that Gerald Hutchins never understood. He knows that the people who get laughed at, who get told they can't, who get knocked down again and again, those are exactly the people who change the world. All they need is someone to believe in them. Tommy Westcott is 84 years old now. He still stutters in conversation. He still goes silent sometimes, the words jamming up behind that invisible wall in his throat. But give him a microphone and a podium, and watch what happens. The rhythm takes over. The words flow, and for a few hours, the stuttering boy from Madison County becomes something else entirely, a voice that commands attention, that drives prices, that turns chaos into order. He never did become a singing telegram, as Gerald Hutchins once suggested. He became something better. He became proof that the things that make us different might be the same things that make us great, that the obstacles we face might be the paths we're meant to walk, that the people who laugh at our dreams might someday need us to save theirs. And he became a reminder to everyone who's ever been mocked, dismissed, or told they don't belong, that the last laugh is worth waiting for. Even if it takes 8 years, even if it takes a lifetime.